You can have everything, success, love, status, and still feel empty. Why? Because until you truly find yourself, your life hasn't really begun. Carl Jung believed that most people live lives of quiet desperation, not because they lack ambition, but because they lack connection to who they really are beneath the roles, the expectations, the conditioning. He said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But here's the thing, most of us don't know who that is. We inherit names, beliefs, cultural scripts. We build identities that please others. We master the art of performance, being what we're supposed to be. But rarely do we stop and ask, who am I really? That question is where life truly begins. Not survival, not routine, but life as something sacred, awake, and uniquely yours. Jung didn't just see self-discovery as an intellectual pursuit. He saw it as a spiritual awakening. To find yourself, he said, you must stop looking out and start looking in. And what you find there will shake you. Because before you uncover your truth, you'll have to confront your illusions, your shadow, your masks, the parts of you you've been avoiding your whole life. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Because as long as you remain a stranger to yourself, the world will feel strange too. Your relationships will feel off. Your work will feel empty. Your joy will feel fleeting. Why? Because you're not really there. You're living someone else's idea of who you should be. And Jung called that the persona, that psychological mask we wear to fit. But no mask, no matter how polished, can satisfy the soul. Eventually, something in you begins to ache. That ache is the call. The invitation to begin the real journey, not outward, but inward. The journey to meet the self behind the persona. The soul behind the performance, the truth behind the noise. And this journey is what Jung called individuation. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the conditioning. But here's what most people don't realize. The path to self-discovery isn't always light and love. Sometimes it begins in the dark, in moments of crisis, in deep sadness, in the quiet panic that whispers, is this really all there is? That moment, terrifying as it may feel, is actually sacred. Because it marks the end of the life you were taught to live, and the beginning of the life you were born to live. A life of death, of truth, of alignment. But to walk that path, you must first be willing to lose who you thought you were. You must let go of who you were told to be. And that takes courage. It takes the kind of radical honesty most people avoid their entire lives. But if you choose to face it, if you choose to stop running and start listening, you'll find something you didn't know you were missing. Yourself. Not the self that conforms, not the self that seeks applause. The self that remembers. Remembers what you came here to do. Remembers the voice that got buried beneath expectations. Remembers how it feels to live in alignment with your deepest truth. And when you reconnect with that voice, everything changes. Your decisions stop coming from fear. They start coming from intuition, from knowing, from power, not the power to control others, the power to be yourself unapologetically. And from that place, you begin to attract what aligns with you, not because you're chasing it, but because you're embodying it. Carl Jung believed that when you align with your true self, life becomes meaningful. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You stop playing small. You stop settling. You stop betraying your own heart for comfort or approval. You wake up. And that awakening, that's the beginning of real life, not the life handed to you. The life you create moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. And it all begins the moment you dare to look in the mirror and say, I'm ready to find myself, no more hiding. Because when you do, you don't just change your life, you change your legacy. When you begin the journey to find yourself, the first thing you run into is everything you've been avoiding. All the pain, the fear, the shame, the memories you push down to survive, it doesn't just vanish. It waits. It hides in the corners of your unconscious, shaping your choices in silence. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This isn't just philosophy. It's your everyday reality. Have you ever asked yourself, Why do I keep repeating the same toxic patterns? Why do I sabotage things that are good for me? Why do I feel empty even when I should feel grateful? The answer isn't always on the surface. It's underneath, in the unconscious. The unconscious is like a hidden operating system, running your life from the shadows. It's where you buried your earliest wounds, your unprocessed emotions, the parts of yourself you were told were too much, not enough, or unacceptable. But here's the truth. Those parts aren't your enemy. They're your lost self. And finding yourself means reclaiming them. That's why Jung placed so much importance on shadow work. Because your shadow is not just the darkness within you. It's the part of you that's been denied light. And here's the paradox. The more you suppress it, the more power it has over you. But when you turn toward it, when you face it with honesty and compassion, it becomes your greatest ally. Think of it like this. Your shadow contains your pain, yes, but also your power. Your anger, once integrated, becomes boundaries. Your sadness, once processed, becomes empathy. Your fear, once faced, becomes wisdom. That's why healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. Because you can't truly find yourself if you're only willing to look at the good parts. You have to see all of you. And that requires a different kind of bravery. Not the kind that runs into battle, but the kind that sits with discomfort. That feels the things you've been running from. That allows grief to move through you. That lets rage speak its truth without shame or judgment. Most people avoid this part of the journey. They'd rather stay busy, distracted, polished on the outside while crumbling on the inside. But you're here because you want truth. And truth demands that you meet yourself, not just the version you show the world, but the version you abandoned along the way. The child who didn't feel seen. The teen who had to toughen up. The adult who wears masks just to get through the day. These aren't separate selves. They're fragments of you. And your work is to bring them home. And that's the real meaning of finding yourself. It's not about constructing a new identity. It's about remembering the one you lost. And when you do that, something powerful happens. You stop feeling like a stranger in your own skin. You stop trying to fix yourself because you realize you were never broken. You were disconnected. Disconnected from your truth, from your instincts, from your full humanity. Carl Jung taught that the path to individuation, the process of becoming your whole true self, requires deep integration. And integration means nothing is left out. Not your pain, not your desires, not even your contradictions. You become a living paradox, strong and soft, grounded and wild, light and shadow. And in that paradox, you discover something sacred. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be real. And realness? That's where life begins. It's where you stop apologizing for who you are. It's where you stop chasing external validation and start trusting your inner compass. It's where you reclaim your energy from people pleasing, from pretending, from performance, and pour it back into your own becoming. This is why the journey within is so profound. Because you're not just healing your past, you're rewriting your future. And not just for you, but for everyone you touch. Because the more whole you become, the more others feel permission to be whole too. Your healing becomes a signal, a vibration that tells others, it's safe to be yourself here. That's what Jung meant when he said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Dreams are beautiful, but they'll never fulfill you if they're built on disconnection. Awakening, on the other hand, isn't always pretty. It's raw, it's messy, it's inconvenient, but it's real. And real is where joy lives, where purpose lives, where you live. So if you've ever felt like you're not really living, like you're just going through the motions, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because something in you is still waiting to be found. And that something, it's not out there. It's within you, waiting, patiently, quietly, faithfully, for you to come home. Every one of us wears a mask, not because we're liars, not because we're fake, but because somewhere along the way we learned that the real us wasn't safe. So we adapted. We became what was rewarded, what was accepted, what made people say good job, or you're so mature, or you've got it all together. Carl Jung called this mask the persona. It's not evil. It's not even a mistake. It's what we build to survive. But the longer we wear it, the more we forget. It's not who we are. And here's the danger. The world starts responding to the mask. You get love for being agreeable. You get praise for being high achieving. You get approval for being selfless. So you keep performing. And every time you do, you drift a little further from your truth. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You say yes when your body screams no. You stay quiet when your soul wants to roar. And slowly, silently, you begin to vanish. Not on the outside, on the inside. You lose your voice, your boundaries, your sense of aliveness. And yet people think you're thriving because the mask is so convincing. But you know the truth. You feel it in a hollowness after the applause, in the anxiety that creeps in when you're alone, in the quiet question that won't go away. Is this really me? That question is sacred. It's the beginning of your return, because the only way back to yourself is through the mask, not by destroying it, but by gently peeling it away. Layer by layer, lie by lie, fear by fear. This is the work. To stop performing and start revealing. To risk being misunderstood. To let go of people who only love the mask. To start surrounding yourself with those who love the truth. Jung believed that persona was necessary at certain stages, but fatal if mistaken for the self. The persona gets you through the world, but it can never give you a life, because a life built on the persona will always feel like acting. You smile when you're sad. You shrink when you want to expand. You say the right thing when the real thing is burning in your chest. And over time, the dissonance becomes unbearable. You start to feel like a ghost in your own story. But here's the turning point. You realize that authenticity is more valuable than approval. You understand that being real, even if it costs you comfort, is the only path to true fulfillment. And that's when things begin to shift. You start telling the truth, even if your voice shakes. You start saying no without explaining yourself. You start creating a life that feels good on the inside, even if it doesn't look perfect on the outside. And slowly, the world you built around your mask begins to crumble. Not because you failed, because you woke up. You see your relationships for what they are. You recognize the job that drains your soul. You confront the lies you've been telling yourself just to get through the day. It hurts, but it also heals. Because for the first time, you're no longer abandoning yourself to be liked. You're choosing to be seen. Really seen. And that's where intimacy begins, not just with others, but with your own soul. Jung taught that your soul is not interested in perfection. It wants truth. It wants integration. It wants you. All of you. Even the messy parts. Even the wild parts. Even the parts you were taught to hide. Because those parts aren't shameful. They're sacred. They're the key to your wholeness. So when you feel the mask cracking, don't panic. That's not failure. That's freedom. You're not losing control. You're finally letting go of what was never real. And what takes its place? A life that feels like yours. Not a performance. Not a checklist. Not a highlight reel. But a life that breathes, that stretches, that belongs to you. This is what Jung meant when he said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. It's terrifying because we fear rejection. But it's also liberating because once you accept yourself fully, no one can use your flaws against you. You become untouchable in the deepest way. Not because you're hardened, because you're rooted in truth, rooted in self-awareness, rooted in a connection that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. And from that root, your real life begins to grow. Slowly, steadily, powerfully. You start to make different choices, not out of fear, but from clarity. You attract new relationships, ones based on truth, not performance. You create new opportunities, ones that align with your soul, not your script. And most of all, you feel alive. Not just busy, not just productive, alive. Because you're no longer surviving behind a mask. You're living in your own skin. And that changes everything. There comes a moment on the journey inward when you realize this isn't just about you. Yes, it begins with your pain, with your patterns, with your desire to feel whole again. But if you go deep enough, if you truly begin to unearth what lies beneath your conditioned identity, you discover something even more powerful. You're not just an isolated self. You are a soul connected to something vast, eternal, and alive. Carl Jung wasn't just a psychologist. He was a mystic in disguise. He saw the human psyche not as a machine to be fixed, but as a mystery to be explored. And at the heart of that mystery is a truth that almost defies language. When you find yourself, you find God. Not necessarily the God of religion, but the living intelligence that animates your being. The divine essence woven through your thoughts, your dreams, your struggles, your longings. Jung believed that the path to wholeness is spiritual, not because it floats above reality, but because it reveals the depth of it. You begin to see that your wounds were never random. Your suffering was never meaningless. Everything was leading you here, to the moment when you could finally hear the soul's voice again. And that voice is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't compete. It whispers. And you've heard it before in the stillness before sleep, in the ache you feel after a heartbreak, in the pull towards something more. That whisper is your essence trying to guide you home. But here's the paradox. To hear it, you have to stop seeking it. You have to stop searching out there for something that's always been in here. That's why Jung placed such importance on dreams, symbols, and archetypes. Because the soul speaks in images, in metaphors, in the language of the unconscious. And if you learn to listen, not just with your mind, but with your presence, you begin to sense the deeper currents of your life. You begin to feel your connection to the collective unconscious, the ancient reservoir of human wisdom that lives within all of us. And suddenly, your personal healing becomes something more. It becomes ancestral. It becomes collective. You realize that in finding yourself, you're also healing your lineage. You're breaking cycles that go back generations. You're becoming the bridge between the past and the future. Because when you step into your truth, you don't just free yourself. You free everyone who came before you and everyone who comes after. And this is where your journey becomes sacred. Not because you become a guru, not because you have all the answers, but because you finally stop betraying your soul. You finally remembered who you are, not just as a name or a role or a personality, but as a spark of something vast and infinite. And from that place, you begin to live differently. You don't chase validation. You don't force things. You listen. You listen to the subtle nudges. You listen to the inner knowing. You follow the thread of your intuition, not because it's always easy, but because it's always true. And that truth becomes your compass. You stop measuring your life by what you achieve and start measuring it by what you feel, by how aligned you are, by how often you say yes to your soul, by how deeply you allow yourself to be human and divine at the same time. Because here's a great secret. Finding yourself is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. It's about standing in the full truth of your being, shadows and all, and saying, I am enough. Not because I've proven anything, but because I exist. That's where power lies. Not in the persona, not in the mask. In the presence of a person who knows who they are and no longer needs the world to tell them. And when you live from that place, you become magnetic. Not in the superficial sense, but in the soulful sense. People feel you. They don't just hear your words, they feel your energy. Because you're no longer performing. You're being. And being is the most powerful force on this planet because it reminds others of their own being. And in a world that's addicted to noise, distraction, and surface-level perfection, a person who has found themselves becomes medicine, not by preaching, but by embodying. Carl Jung understood this. He knew that healing is not just personal, it's planetary. And every time you choose truth over image, presence over performance, integrity over approval, you contribute to the healing of the whole. So no, this isn't just about you. It's about the ripple effect of your awakening. It's about the quiet revolution that begins every time someone chooses to come home to themselves. It's about life itself reclaiming its place through you. And that is where life really begins. When you begin to find yourself, something unexpected happens. Your relationships change. Some deepen. Some disappear. Some erupt like volcanoes, revealing everything that's been buried under years of pretending. Because when you shift, the dynamics around you shift too. Carl Jung understood this on a profound level. He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. When you stop performing and start being, you trigger a chain reaction. The people who only loved your mask won't recognize you. The ones who needed you to stay small might resist your growth. And the roles you used to play, caretaker, peacekeeper, overachiever, start to feel impossible to carry. Because you're no longer willing to abandon yourself for connection. You're no longer willing to keep the peace at the cost of your truth. And yes, that can be lonely at first. But it's not a punishment. It's a purification. It's the necessary fire that burns away the false so the real can remain. You begin to realize that love isn't about sacrifice. It's about resonance. It's about being seen, known, and accepted, not just for your light, but for your whole being. And that means setting boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as bridges that protect what's sacred within you. Before, you might have tolerated toxic dynamics because you didn't want to be alone. Now, you'd rather be alone than betray yourself again. That's the power of self-discovery. It creates a new standard, not just for how others treat you, but for how you treat yourself. You become more discerning, more rooted, more loving, not in a people-pleasing way, but in a way that honors your soul. And that changes everything. You start speaking up, not to be right, but to be real. You stop chasing unavailable people, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. You stop performing for love, because you finally understand real love doesn't require a performance. It meets you where you are. It sees you. It supports your growth, not just your compliance. And here's where it gets beautiful. The more you embody your truth, the more you attract people who match it. People who want depth. People who value honesty. People who see you and say, "I'm here for the real you, not the version you had to become." These are soul connections. The kind Jung spoke about when he explored the concept of anima and animus, the inner masculine and feminine forces that, once integrated, magnetize balanced partnerships. But these relationships can only emerge once you've begun to integrate yourself. You can't experience true intimacy if you're still hiding behind an identity. You can't receive real love if you convince the world you don't need it. You can't create mutual support if you're stuck in roles of rescuing or being rescued. That's why inner work is the foundation of relational healing. Because every relationship is a mirror, and when your reflection changes, so does the way people engage with you. You may lose some connections, but you gain something greater, authentic alignment. Friendships that energize you. Partnerships that challenge and support you. Boundaries that feel like freedom, not restriction. This is the paradox of finding yourself. You stop needing others to complete you, and suddenly, connection becomes richer. Not because it fills a void, but because it celebrates your wholeness. You love from overflow, not desperation. You give without resentment. You receive without guilt. This is mature love, rooted love, real love. And it doesn't require perfection, just presence, just truth, just two souls showing up with open hearts and honest intentions. But none of this is possible without the initial courage to walk away from what's false, to say no to what doesn't nourish you, to let go of the people who only love the version of you that stayed silent. Because here's what Jung knew. To truly love another, you must first know yourself. And to know yourself, you must be willing to stand alone. Not forever, but long enough to remember your worth, long enough to hear your own voice, long enough to stop confusing connection with codependency. Only then can you create relationships that are truly mutual, truly supportive, truly real. So yes, the path of self-discovery can be disruptive. It can shake the very foundation of your connections. But in that shaking is truth. And in that truth is freedom. Freedom to be yourself. Freedom to love deeply. Freedom to build a life and relationships that reflect your soul. And that is the beginning of everything. You've taken off the mask. You've faced the shadow. You've let go of false connections. Now what? You begin to feel it. A quiet stirring. A sense that your life wants to mean something, that your story isn't just a survival tale, it's a message. Carl Jung believed that purpose isn't something we find outside ourselves. It's something that emerges when we become whole. And that emergence doesn't always look dramatic. It often starts as a whisper, a curiosity, a fascination, a pull towards something you can't quite explain. Maybe it's a kind of work that excites you, a truth you feel called to speak, a path that makes your heart beat faster, even if your mind is terrified. That's your calling beginning to surface. But here's the thing. Your calling is not always comfortable. It doesn't always promise success or applause. What it does promise is truth. And truth, real, soul-deep truth, has a way of unsettling everything that isn't aligned with it. You might find yourself walking away from what used to matter, not because you're impulsive, but because something in you knows you're not meant to live a half-life. Not anymore. You're meant to serve something greater than your fear. And that's what purpose is. It's not a job title. It's not a 5-year plan. It's a decision to listen, to follow what feels alive, to say yes to what ignites your soul, even if it doesn't make logical sense. This is what Jung meant when he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Because when you become who you are, your life begins to speak. It begins to radiate something only you can offer. Your experiences, your insights, your wounds transformed into wisdom. No one else can live your story, and no one else can give the world what you're here to give. That's not ego, that's essence. And essence is never in competition. It doesn't need comparison. It just needs expression. When you live in alignment with your essence, you stop trying to be impressive. You start trying to be impactful. You stop chasing popularity. You start living with integrity. You stop asking, what will people think? You start asking, what does my soul know? And that question will lead you, again and again, into deeper alignment. Not with trends, not with expectations, but with something eternal. That's what purpose really is. It's your soul's way of participating in the unfolding of life. And it might not look like what the world expects. Your purpose might not be loud. It might not be marketable. It might not fit neatly into a social media bio. But you'll know the way it feels. Grounded. Energizing. Inevitable. It's the thing you do when you're not trying to be productive. It's the gift you give when you're not trying to be useful. It's the truth you speak when you've forgotten how to lie. And most of all, it's the path that brings you closer to your own soul. Jung knew this. Your calling is tied to your individuation. It's not about escaping the world. It's about showing up in the world as a whole human being and letting that wholeness do the work. Sometimes that means writing. Sometimes it means parenting. Sometimes it means starting a business or becoming a healer or simply choosing to live with radical honesty. Whatever form it takes, it's valid. And it's vital. Because the world doesn't need more people following scripts. It needs people on fire with authenticity. People who've done the work to know themselves. People who found the courage to live in alignment. People who are willing to serve, not from obligation, but from overflow. That's the new leadership. That's the new success. That's the kind of purpose that changes lives, not because it's flashy, but because it's real. And that begins with a single decision: to trust what you feel more than what you're told. To stop asking for permission and start listening to your soul. Because here's the truth Jung would want you to remember. You were never here just to survive. You were never here just to fit in. You were never here just to impress. You are here to embody the truth. To express what's uniquely yours. To live a life that whispers and then shouts, "This is who I am." And when you do, that's when life begins. Not a life of performance. Not a life of people-pleasing. A life of purpose. Not found, but remembered. When you finally come home to yourself, life doesn't just change in the big ways. It changes in the smallest ones. You walk differently. You breathe differently. You see differently. Not because the world has shifted, but because you have. You're no longer reacting, you're responding. You're no longer surviving, you're creating. You're no longer pretending, you're present. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Once you face what's within, the external world becomes something new. Ordinary moments begin to glow with meaning. Silence feels rich. Solitude feels full. Conversations become deeper, not because you're trying harder, but because you're listening from a different place. A place that no longer needs to prove anything. Because now you know your worth isn't up for debate. Your presence is enough. Your being is valid. That's a radical shift in a world that profits from your insecurity. You start showing up in ways that confuse people. You say no without explaining. You rest without guilt. You create without permission. Not because you become arrogant, but because you become aligned. You've learned to trust the rhythm of your own life. And that rhythm, it doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It doesn't grind itself into exhaustion just to feel worthy. It moves with intention. It acts with clarity. It rests with confidence. This isn't laziness. It's liberation. The kind of liberation that comes when you no longer build your identity on how much you do, but on how deeply you are. And in this space, something magical happens. You begin to live life as a ritual. You start to infuse meaning into the mundane. You drink your morning coffee with reverence. You wash the dishes while humming songs from your childhood. You walk through the world not as someone trying to keep up, but as someone already whole. That's what finding yourself really means. It doesn't mean arriving at some perfect state of being. It means becoming intimate with your own aliveness, feeling your joy, honoring your pain, following the subtle tugs of your soul. This is where life becomes art, not performance, but expression. Not curated, but true. And you begin to notice something else. You have more energy, not because you're doing less, but because you're no longer leaking it. You're not performing. You're not masking. You're not carrying 1,000 shoals and shouldens. You're just being. And being is efficient. Being is powerful. Being is enough. This changes how you work, how you rest, how you love. You start asking better questions. Not, how can I get ahead? But how can I stay aligned? Not, how can I make them like me? But how can I love myself through this? Not, what's wrong with me? But what does this part of me need? This is the practical magic of wholeness. It shows up in your choices, your boundaries, your relationships, your habits. You begin to nourish yourself the way you once wished others would. You start to speak kindly to the parts of yourself you used to criticize. You begin to extend compassion to your own fear, knowing it's not the enemy, just a messenger. And this shift doesn't make you perfect. It makes you present. It makes you capable of staying with yourself even in the mess. Because the truth is, finding yourself doesn't mean you won't fall apart again. It means you'll know how to return. You'll have an inner compass, a connection to the self that doesn't dissolve when life gets chaotic. You'll stop looking for escape and start building resilience, not from grit alone, but from gentleness, not from force, but from flow. And that kind of power, it's quiet, it's steady, it's sacred. It's the power of someone who has nothing to prove because they've already met their own soul. And in the end, that's all this journey ever asks of you. To meet yourself, to stay with yourself, to live not as a reaction, but as a revelation. Because once you found yourself, you realize you were never broken. You were only buried. You were never lost. You were only waiting. Waiting for the day you'd stop running. Stop performing, stop hiding, and finally, begin to live. So now you've heard the truth. Not the truth about some abstract philosophy, but the truth about you. You are not here to fit. You are not here to perform. You are not here to constantly fix, improve, and hustle until you become lovable. You are already enough. You are already whole. And your life, your real life, begins the moment you choose to stop running from yourself. Carl Jung didn't offer shortcuts. He offered depth. He invited us to remember that what we're looking for out there already exists within us. And now the invitation is yours to accept. So here's what I'm asking. Pause for a moment. breathe, and ask yourself, where am I still pretending? Where am I performing instead of expressing? Where am I choosing approval over truth? Where am I staying small because expansion feels scary? Write it down. Say it out loud. Look at it without judgment. Because the moment you become aware of the false, you create space for the true. You don't have to change everything overnight. You don't need to blow up your life in some dramatic, movie-worthy transformation. You just need to start listening to the part of you that already knows, to the voice inside that's been whispering all along, this isn't who you really are. And then when you're ready, act. One small choice, one honest conversation, one moment of saying no when you used to say yes. That's how change begins. It doesn't start with a breakthrough. It starts with a decision to show up as you. And if that scares people, let it. If it shakes your relationships, let it. If it leads you into the unknown, go. Because the unknown is where your soul waits. It's where your path begins, not the path they gave you, but the one that's yours. So start walking. Yes, you'll stumble. Yes, you'll doubt. Yes, you'll want to turn back. But don't. Because every step forward is a step back home. Back to your voice. Back to your vision. Back to the self you buried beneath years of roles and rules. This isn't about self-help. It's about self-remembrance. You're not here to become someone new. You're here to become who you've always been. And if you've forgotten that, let this video be your reminder. Let Jung's words echo in your mind. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because that's the work. That's the courage. That's the beginning. So if this message moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, not just the video. Share your story. Share your truth. Share the part of you that's finally ready to stop hiding. Because when one person decides to live authentically, it gives others permission to do the same. You're not just healing for yourself. You're becoming a lighthouse, a mirror, a spark.